Hey y'all, welcome to the Coyote Traffic School Podcast, episode number 10. I appreciate everybody following along and downloading. We've been getting very good response, and seems like a lot of folks are enjoying it, appreciating the trapping talk and the trapping focus, and so I intend to keep it going, and I'm pretty excited. I'm enjoying it myself, and kind of giving a little more structure to things, and trying to be a little bit thoughtful about how we go through things. And so hope it's useful. Hope it continues to be useful. As always, feel free to shoot me a question if you've got a suggestion for a topic to cover, anything like that. Because some of the topics that I cover are based on questions that I get asked periodically. So this episode today, we're going to talk about trap modifications. So if you're new to trapping, you may be kind of unfamiliar once you start flipping through a trapping catalog and you see trap, a standard 1.5 coil spring, and then you see 1.5 coil spring offset and a 1.5 coil spring modified offset and 1.5 coil spring 4-coiled modified offset, and there can be a lot of different variations of what seems to be the same kind of trap. So I'm just going to kind of go through that and discuss what those modifications are or are for, and the reasoning behind them. So one of the first things that I'm talking, most of this stuff applies to all traps. Any foothold trap can be modified in these different ways, but for today's purposes, we're mainly talking about predator trapping. So one of the first things that you can see in the general modified category of traps is base plating. And so all this is adding an extra piece of metal on the frame, the bottom frame of the trap, and it just gives the trap some strength and a little bit more stability, a little bit more sturdiness. And this is especially important when you're targeting and you're trapping larger, hard fighting animals like coyotes and even wolves and mountain lions and things like that. Because what can happen is an animal gets caught and he's pulling on the trap, and the chain's holding him and he's pulling on the trap. They can't exert enough force that this frame will actually bend and bow. And so you don't want that. One, because you don't want your trap to warp, and that can affect the way other things work. And it can also, in conjunction or out of conjunction with that, it can cause your jaws to actually pop out, and you can lose a catch. So you don't want your frame warping if at all possible. So adding that extra piece on the bottom, that base plate, will help strengthen that. Typically that comes with a center swiveled. So usually you'll see base plate D-ring, and a D-ring is just the ring that goes on the bottom in the center of the trap that your swivel and chain are attached to. And the center swivel is really, a lot of traps nowadays are center swiveled, but the reasoning behind that is some of the older traps or some of the smaller traps where it's not as crucial, they are swiveled on the side. And so what you can actually happen is if you make a catch and the animal gets caught and he's caught a little bit offset, well, as he's pulling, if the trap is side swiveled, then that foot actually could potentially slide in the trap, which is going to cause lacerations to the foot, and that's something we don't want. We don't want any damage to that foot. So whereas if you've got that trap that's center swiveled, that animal gets caught regardless of where he's caught. Typically the trap with the center swivel he's going to be pulling kind of directly away from it. So that's going to minimize the odds of the foot sliding inside the trap. So that's definitely something we don't want any damage to that animal's foot. So we're trying to do whatever we can to prevent that. Talking with the frame and the jaws, it is possible, these kind of factory stamped jaws, that these things can be popped out of the frame, whether the frame warps or not. So there are a couple things you can do to that. You can actually take some vice grips and just bend the tips of those jaws up, or you can just hit them with a welder and put a little bubble on each of the jaws to keep them from moving. And that's one of the nice features with the MB550 is the way those jaws are cast. They actually have a little hook on the end of the jaws where it fits into the frame, and they're not coming out. So not without messing something up severely. So that covers kind of your first couple base plating and center swiveling, and then, like I said, depending on what traps you're running and what you're targeting, you may also want to consider bubbling those tips of the jaws just to make sure that you don't get, if you're catching foxes and coons, probably not a big deal. But if you're catching coyotes, those coyotes, repeated catches over and over, they're going to test your equipment, and they're going to find a weak spot if there is one. So that's one of the reasons some of the stuff seems like overkill for trapping coyotes, but they're very powerful animals, and if you're trying to catch them consistently and use your traps year in, year out, which why wouldn't you, then in my opinion it helps and it pays to kind of take those precautions on the front end versus having a jaw pop and realizing, shoot, now I need to go fix all my other traps. So that's the first couple. While we're talking about center swiveling, you've got your swivels that come off of the chain. So typically, I like to have 2 swivels in my chain set up, and one at the base of the trap, and then one where I attach the trap to the stake every time I'm staking. So that gives, if you use another J hook on the end, that gives you 4 swiveling points, 2 on each swivel. And typically I found that in most cases that's not going to fail. That's enough swiveling points, and if you're running a 24-hour check, you're not going to have much failure. Honestly, the thing that clogs my swivels the most is a possum. I don't know how a possum, he can be caught in a set with nothing but dirt all the way around it, and he's going to find some grass to wrap and wrap and wrap around that swivel. I don't know how they do it, but they can get stuff wrapped in the swivel more than any other critter that I've ever messed with. So there are Minnesota brand sells a crunch proof swivel, and you can look and compare the Minnesota crunch proof to this Bridger. You can definitely tell there's a difference. Now, I can't sit here and tell you that I've ever had a swivel crunched by a coyote, but I can also say that I pretty early on switched all of my swivels to the crunch proof swivel. When I first started trapping, this is one of the first traps that I started trapping with, as a Victor 1 3/4 modified, and one of the first things I did, I think it came with some twin loop chain, and I took that twin loop chain off and put machine chain and crunch proof swivels on, just because I want to, like I said, I feel like it's worthwhile to me from the start to get everything set up right and not have to worry about it later on. I'm not a fan of this twin loop chain. This is swing chain. It's just wrapped around, and if you're trapping fox and coons, hey, that's good to go, rock out. But if you're targeting coyotes, I'd recommend up into machine chain. You can buy it from all the trap and supply dealers now. It's sturdy and it's going to last years. And then these Bridgers, I haven't used them enough that I can talk badly about the swivels that come on them, but I'm a crunch proof swivel fan. I like my things, like I said, I like to kind of get them set up and then not ever have to worry about them. So that's up to you. I definitely would recommend switching your chain out if you got twin loop chain for machine chain and swivels. That's up to you, your prerogative. One other thing that I get questions on sometimes, I got questioned on recently, is chain length. And to me, that depends on your scenario and how you're staking. But if you're in the modern era and you're not living in the dark ages, then you're using cable stakes, so it's not as big of an issue. But to me, the difference lies in whether you're using cable or rebar. And personally, I'm a short chain fan. These Minnesotas, I don't know what they come with. That's probably 10 inches of chain, including your swivels. And I've actually, you can see this one. One of the earlier ones that I did, that's got two lengths of chain and 2 swivels. That's pretty darn short. It's actually a little too short, honestly. But 4 to 6 lengths of chain and 2 swivels, and man, to me that's perfect. That's ideal. I don't like to have a lot of chain, and I don't like to try to figure out what to do with 4 feet of chain in my bed. So I'm a short chain fan, but if you're using rebar, and especially if you're single staking rebar, short chain may not be the best option, and this is why. If you're staking with rebar and you're using a short chain, then that animal, you know, that's the biggest circle that he's got with that trap foot that he can get in. So yeah, sure, he's going to pull out, but he's going to wind up pulling up at some point because of how short that chain is and just using his back legs if he's caught by the front foot. So the thing about this and single staking is, even if you use a 48-inch long one, every time that sucker pulls up, if the stake actually gives and starts coming up, so he pulls, it comes out of the ground 6 inches. When he lets off, that swivel ratchets back down. It slides back down, and that can actually act as a one-way lock, particularly on rebar. You won't see it with this smooth rod probably, but with rebar, what can happen is then he pulls up again. Well, that rebar locks into that swivel, and it pulls it up another 6 inches. And he just, what you'll hear the term pumped out. He pumped the stake out, and that's what it is that if you're using short chain, they can get leverage and pull straight up and actually just jack that chain, jack that stake right out on his own. And so that's why if you are using rebar, especially single staking, and I use 3 or 4 feet of chain to get that animal out and pulling away instead of pulling up. That way he's fighting the chain and not the stake specifically. So just my 2 cents there. Like I said, you're crazy if you're using rebar. I know there's probably a few of you that are using it for specific purposes, but if you're staking coyote sets with rebar, I think you're crazy. But that's just me. But anyway, enough about that. Let's move on to, okay, so one other thing that I add is shock springs. I get questions about shock springs sometimes, and I personally don't see a lot of value in shock springs, especially if you're using a short chain, because that's only so much kind of runway that a coyote can get before it catches. So versus if you're using 4 feet of chain and he's at one end of the catch circle and he's cut straight across the center, go slam to the other end as hard as he can. He's covering 8 feet, and then he hits the end. That can give him a good jerk. So in a longer chain scenario, a shock spring may work better. I put them on my traps when I was trapping for the live market, and really I didn't see a whole lot of difference. Like I said, I was using short chain to begin with, and short chain along with shock springs can get a little awkward to bed. That's one scenario also where it helps to have a little bit of chain. I wouldn't attach my shock spring directly to my swivel. If you're using it, I would put it away from the trap just a little bit. And the way I found the easiest way to bed that was if I had enough chain that I could put my shock spring out and rest my loose jaw on my shock spring. That tended to work out about the best as far as getting that spring out of the way and it not being a hindrance to my bedding. So that has us covered on chain and from the frame down. So now let's talk about the jaws. So one thing, you've got offsets. Offset and then standard jaw. And offset is a gap between your jaws where the jaws don't come all the way together and close fully. So there's a couple of different theories, and I don't know that I have heard what I would consider a definitive theory on why it is. What I understood and what I was told, when I started trapping is that, and it makes sense, is that that's to increase the blood flow to the caught foot. So the trap's jaws don't come all the way together, so that leaves a little bit of a gap, so that can allow blood flow to get to the trap portion of the foot and help in the overall care of that animal's foot. It makes sense. Honestly, I don't know whether that's true or not, but it makes sense thinking about it. But if you start researching it a little bit, you're liable to go down a huge rabbit hole, and there's Trapper Man threads that are thousands of pages long, it seems like, that talk about how the mechanical advantage of the offset traps. Excuse me. So the idea behind that is, and I got to think about this to make sure I get it right, But because the traps are offset, the jaws are able to close more fully than if the trap was a standard jaw trap, if that makes sense. So if you've got a standard jaw trap and it catches the foot, it's not, it's going to have a little bit of indentation on the foot, but overall, it's where it's at. Versus if you have an offset jaw trap, that trap closes on the foot, but your cutout for your offset allows, in theory, the edges of those jaws to close further, which allows your levers to come up just slightly higher and give you more holding power and a little bit of potentially a mechanical advantage, if you will, by those jaws being able to close slightly more. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It took me a couple of times of reading it and thinking through it and trying to figure out exactly what they were talking about. And like I said, I don't know that the offset, some people will argue that it was. It seems hard for me to think that was how offset came about, was because it allowed the jaws to close a little bit farther. Maybe so. Trappers are pretty ingenious folks, so it's possible. But regardless, offset jaw traps have a little gap between where the jaws come together. And maybe it's just a PR feel-good thing. Maybe it actually has some use, but that's what it is. And some states may require offset jaws, rubber jaws, offset laminated jaws, whatever. So be cognizant of that when you are selecting your traps. The other portion of your jaws is lamination. Well, I bought a lamination kit. I just realized that I didn't think about it when I was prepping, but I bought a lamination kit for my number 2 bridgers. These. I was going to show you what it is. It's just a lamination is just a piece of steel, a round piece of steel, like usually I think it's 3/16, that is welded either on top or it can go on the bottom, and it's called inside if it's on the bottom or outside if it's on the top. Lamination, so inside or outside. And this is a rusty trap, and you may or may not be able to see it. I ain't gonna mess with it. This is one that's seen better days. I think it got run over by a tractor or two. But it's just a round bar, a round piece of rod that's welded onto the top of the trap, or like I said, in some cases onto the bottom. The bottom jaws, or some traps are double laminated, so they'll have a lamination on both the top and bottom, and that's just for to disperse the pressure that's put on the animal's foot. You're spreading out the surface area that's meeting with the foot. So, and then some of the inside versus outside, that's kind of personal preference. I know some folks like the inside because, especially if they're targeting or if they're catching a lot of incidental coons, it minimizes the area under the jaw, inside the jaws, that the animal could potentially get to his foot if he wanted to, chew on it, or if he's chewing on the trap, he winds up chewing on his foot. And then also, some folks use inside lamination because it makes the jaw spread. If they measure the inside jaw spread, depending on the state regulations, it can put a trap potentially in legal regulation size if the lamination is on the inside of the jaws. So, and a lot of times that, in conjunction with rounding of the inside of the jaw, whatever side doesn't get laminated to make sure that you've got a smooth, round surface, you don't have any sharp edges or sharp pinch points. And the MB550s, they aren't laminated per se, but they have a cast jaw, which has a wide surface that gives the same effect as a lamination. So that covers your jaws. Other thing that you have is you can night latch your pans. So night latching you night latch your dog typically, and then or in this case what they call positrip pans. It's kind of the same thing. It's a dog with either a nipple or a night latch in it, to where when you set it and you pull that pan down, you hear that click, and that tells you that trap's ready to fire. And it's called a night latch because if you were setting traps in the dark, you could pull it down till you hear that click, and boom, you know that trap's ready to go. You don't have to try to eyeball it and look at how level your pen is. So that's one thing that can be done. You yourself can do just with a file, just filing down just a little notch in that dog to where, when you hear that click, you know that trap's set and it's ready to go. And then otherwise, I don't know that it's necessarily considered modification, but four-coiling. So, these traps, these coil spring traps have two coil springs, and then some traps, of course, have 4 coil springs. And I get asked about this some too, and I've never trapped in areas, up north where you're dealing with frozen ground and snow and things like that. I know in the southeast, the 2 coil traps work just fine. So the brand new MB550s are pretty stout traps. So, even if you do live up north, one kind of recommendation that I kind of go with sometimes is, buy the 2 coils and use those for a couple of years, and then you can just buy the 4 coil add-on springs and beef them up later. And that kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Because that's, like I said, brand new 550 is a pretty stout trap. There's plenty of holding power there and catching power there. So anyway, that goes through most of the modifications that I can think of. Hope that helps. Gives you a little insight if you were wondering what some of that different trapping terminology means and what the purpose of it is. Like I said, some of it's still debated and argued about. But regardless, to me the takeaway is, trappers, we're constantly evolving. Some of that is from our desire to improve, and some of it is from society's desire for us to be, I guess, more politically correct, if you will. And really all that is making people feel better about what we do, I guess. So, a lot of these modifications, like I said, the modifications in my mind, the overall design is, and the overall reason for the modification and the improvements is to minimize any damage to the trapped animal. And overall, that's a good thing. And there's best management practices. There's, I'm trying to think of the Canadian group that tests, modifications and tests traps in general to see, and there's a set of standards as to, if this trap meets the standards for catching this animal. And there's been research into, and I need to dig into that. I found a couple of research papers comparing like padded jaw traps to standard jaw traps, and a lot of the research is pretty old, but still I think it'd be useful to go through. A lot of it from government trappers that have, they're using them over a couple of years and they're catching a lot of game. So it's valuable information, and maybe we can break it down and put a little more clarity around some of the true benefits or some of the true costs of some of these different modifications, such as rubber jaw versus offset modified or offset laminated. So anyway, I hope that helps. Hope you're enjoying the podcast. I know some of you are already out trapping, so I hope y'all are hammering them and doing good. And I just got my stakes in, so I've got all my water traps dyed. I've got to get my stakes on my land traps, my predator traps, and then get them dyed. And I still got a month and a half or so, but I'm going to be getting after it. In just a couple weeks, I'll be going to Ohio trapping, and I'll be bringing y'all along for that, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoy, and good luck out there this season. Hey, I just wanted to say thanks for watching, thanks for following, thanks for listening, ever how you're consuming this. And if you want to show some support, I appreciate your support of just watching, leaving comments, and interacting with me. If you want to show a little support and help support the podcast, the YouTube channel, and the trapping endeavors, and us bringing you the content, be sure to go to CoyoteTrappingSchool.com. We've got an online store there where we have some Coyote merchandise. So if you need a Lucky Trapping hat, we got you covered there. If you need a little more luck on the trap line, got some Coyote Trapping School hats, shirts, gloves, bags,
We also carry some Minnesota trap line products, baits, lures, and urines. Top quality stuff that I use on my trap line every year, and also sell those in packages. So if you're interested in getting started and you don't really know what baits or lures to use, you can buy one of the packages that we've got, that I've got kind of pre-selected. That's a great starting point to get out there and start catching game. Also, if you're new to trapping and want to learn more about it, want a clear, concise, and central location to learn how to do it, the Coyote Trapping 101 course that I put together takes you from start to finish, from the bottom up. So far, you know what gear you need, how to set a trap, where to set traps, and how to set your traps, and even what to do after you catch your animal, your coyote, skin it, marketing your furs, and all that. Like I said, all that's in one central location. If you're tired of trying to piece together and part together YouTube videos and forum comments and different things, go to this one central place. Soon we'll be adding different species: raccoon, bobcat, beaver, otter, fox, to try to make that a well-rounded trapping library, not just specifically coyote trapping, but if you're interested in trapping, that's the place that you can go to and watch the videos that you need when you need them on your time, and learn specifically how to get started trapping. So be sure that's also on the website at Coyote Trapping School. Be sure to check that out, and I appreciate y'all following along. I appreciate the support, and I hope y'all are killing it on the trap line. Good luck this season.